Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created Phaser 3. Previously, we worked on adding in collisions for our items that have been added to our world scene. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as the source code for this video. There'll also be links to previous videos to catch up. So let's get started. So now that we've finished adding in our items to our world scene, and our player can actually collide with them and pick them up in our game, and we can persist that data, we're going to go ahead and start working on our next feature. And so in our next feature, what we're going to do is we're going to start enhancing our game to support multiple areas and to support building interiors. And so to support that, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to enhance our tiled map data to have locations where we can define where we want to transition to another map. And so to see an example of what we're going to be building is we're going to focus on our building interiors. And so what we're going to do with our level data is we're going to go ahead and enhance it so that when our player encounters one of our doors for our buildings, they're actually going to go ahead and enter into one of our buildings. We'll be able to move around, they'll be able to interact with the scene and collide with it, and we will have the option for adding in things like NPCs, where the player will be able to go ahead and talk to them and do different things. And then so what we'll do is we'll add collisions completely around our building so the player can't leave, and then we'll define a transition so the player can go ahead and leave that level and transition back to our world scene at the location we define. And so by adding in these transition areas, all we have to do is tell Phaser which level JSON file we want to load, and then we can go ahead and show a different level. And so to make this happen, what we're going to need to do is in our tile data, we're going to need to go ahead and define a new object layer. We're going to call this scene transitions. And what this layer is going to allow us to do is we're going to be able to define objects where we want to have some metadata for what we want the player to do when they enter that area. And so as an example here, we're going to have these entrances. And so this is just a basic object that has some metadata. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, we want to connect to this particular level. And then that way, when the player goes to interact with it, we're going to load that JSON file in Phaser and then display that to the player. And so as we can see here, we have these two different entrances, and we're going to tie them to different building 2 JSON files that we'll be able to load. And so later on, we'd be able to extend this so that way we could easily create transitions as the player moves through different parts of our game. Alright, so to go ahead and get started, what we need to do is let's go ahead and open up our level in tiled. And the first thing we need to do is we're going to go ahead and define our entrances for our buildings. And so to go ahead and do this, we're going to make a brand new object layer, and we're going to go ahead and call this scene transitions. And so real quick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and lock our item layer so we can't modify it. And now we're only in our scene transitions. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and use our encounter block here for we add in our data. So then that way it's just yellow, we can easily see it. So then we want to go ahead and select our insert tile. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is just add a tile over both of our doors here where a player would go ahead and enter our buildings. And so I'm just going to go ahead and add in 2 of them. And now what we want to do is we need to add some metadata to each of these tile objects. So then that way we know how to handle this in our Phaser game. And so for this, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and use one of our custom classes that we previously imported. And so this class that we're going to use is going to go ahead and be called entrance. And so once we add this class, we'll see some new properties show up on our objects. And so we can see connects to, entrance ID, and then is building. And then real quick, we'll come right back to that. I'm going to go ahead and add our class to our other one as well. And so what this is used for is these properties are what we're going to use in Phaser to know which tile level data we're going to go ahead and load. And so there are a few different ways we could handle our areas in our game. We could just have one giant massive map where we have our buildings like off to our side, and then we could just point the player to go ahead and show up in that location. Or we could have multiple individual files that we load in Phaser, and then that way they're all encapsulated. And depending on the scope of your game can get very large if you're building a very large area, and loading in all that data could eat up a lot of resources in your browser. And by separating these out to separate files, it makes them easier to modify later on. And so that's the approach we'll be taking for this series. And so what we need to do is now we'll need to know how to connect this level JSON or my custom town level to a building level that we're going to be building shortly. And so that's what the connects to property is used for. This is going to tell us, say, when we load our code in Phaser, when we interact with this block, we want to go ahead and when we restart our world scene, we want to go ahead and load that specific JSON file. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and call this building 1. And so when we create our building level, what we'll do is we'll export it out as building 1 JSON. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. And then for our other one, we're just going to go ahead and call this building 2. And so that way we know which building we want to load. And now entrance ID, what this is used for is when our player wants to interact with this particular building, there's a possibility there could be multiple entrances. And so like, let's say if there was a back entrance into the back of the building, or even if it was like a shopping mall and maybe we have 2 different doors that you can enter, we want to give each of these unique IDs. And then that way when the player interacts with them, we know when we load the other part of the level, so like our building here, if we had more than one entrance, we would know where to place our player based on that. And so like if you can imagine, if this wasn't a window, this was actually a door, and we come up to our building, if we enter from here, we would want to spawn our player here and not always over here at our main entrance. And so that's what we'll be using our entrance ID for. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and set them both to 1. So for our simple buildings right now, there's only 1 entrance. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to check this box that it is a building. And then all that's going to be used for, that's just metadata to know that, hey, we're entering into a building. And then if we want to do something with it in our game, we can. All right, and so with our changes, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and save. And then I'm going to go ahead and export out our new JSON file. So I'm going to do export as, and we're just going to do level.json. And I'm going to place mine on my desktop so I can easily locate it. So now that we've updated our level JSON to have our transitions, we actually need to build out our additional buildings. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to make a new file. And so I'm just going to do new, we're going to do new map. And so for our map, I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller. And so you can make these any size you want. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do 13 tiles for my width. And I'm going to go ahead and do 9 tiles for my height. And then we need to go ahead and update our tile width and size. And so we'll do 64 pixels by 64 pixels. And I'll go ahead and hit OK. And what this is going to do, it's going to go ahead and create a new level for us that we can go ahead and edit. So the first thing we'll want to do is we'll want to import any tile sets that we want to use. And so what we'll do is let's go ahead and browse. And we're going to want to use our axle, our interior here, to build out most of our levels. So let's go ahead and import that in. We'll want to make sure we embed it in our map. And so our tile width and height will be 64 pixels. And so let's go ahead and hit OK. So now we have our tile sets, and we can go ahead and add in items to our map. Perfect. And so we're just going to add a few more tile sets, so we'll have everything we need. So let's go ahead and add in our encounter. And so this will be so we can add our metadata to our map. And we'll go ahead and leave our defaults here. And let's go ahead and add in our encounter, our collision. And we'll go ahead and hit OK. And one more is we're going to go ahead and choose this entrance PNG. So previously we grabbed this asset when we grabbed our interior sprite sheet. And we'll go ahead and add that. And that's also 64 by 64. And so what we should see in our levels, now we should have our 4 tile sets that we can go ahead and use. All right, so before I start adding some tiles to our level, what we're going to do is I'm going to add some layers so we can easily organize what we want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this tile layer 1. And so I'm going to go ahead and call this collision. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a new layer for our foreground. And so we'll add a new tile layer. I'm just going to call this foreground. And then we'll go ahead and add a new group layer. And I'm just going to call this main scene. And so in our group layer here, we're going to use this just for organizing a lot of our sprites. So then that way we can easily toggle this on and off when we want to export out our image. And so this is going to include things for like our background here. We have our floor, our wall. It's going to have our decorations. And then so we can have a bunch of sub layers that we organize everything. But then if we want to go ahead and export our image, we can just easily toggle this on and off. And so what I'm going to do inside our main scene is I'm going to add a few more layers. And so I'm going to add a tile layer. I'm going to call this entrance. And I'm going to add one more tile layer. And we'll do decorations. And let's do background. And then I'm going to go ahead and place these into our main scene group. And that way they're all together. All right, so to get started, I'm going to go ahead and start with our collision layer. And so for our collision layer, we'll want to use our collision tile here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around the whole outside of our map. And then that way our player can't leave our bounds. And so I'm just going to do this all the way around our map. And then what I'm going to go ahead and lock that layer. So then next, let's go ahead and start with our background. And so for our background, this is going to be like our floor and our walls. And so for our floor, I'm going to go ahead and use this tile here. And I'm just going to go ahead and add that throughout our level here. And so if you go ahead and use the shift key, you can make sure it stays in a line. All right, and then we need to go ahead and add in our walls. And so for our walls, I'm going to go ahead and use this tile here. And we're just going to build our back wall right here. And then what we're going to do is just to add some more decorations. I'm going to go ahead and just add this top part of our wall. And that way just add some definition to our back of our wall here. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and lock that layer so we can't modify it. And then next what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and add our entrance. And so what our entrance is gonna be, this is just going to be a little rug. And then that way our player knows where to go in our level to go ahead and exit our building. So for that, what we'll do is we're gonna use our tile set for our entrance here. I'm just gonna grab all 3 tiles. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna come over here and place our entrance right there. So then what I'll do is I'm gonna go ahead and lock that layer. And now for our decorations. And so for our decorations, this is just going to let us decorate our level. And so I'm going to come back to our interior. And then what we can start doing is just grabbing random objects and we can add them to our scene. All right, and so for our decorations, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a few things. And I'm just going to go ahead and place these in our level. And so let's go ahead and place these in front of our wall. And so we'll do like the sink. We're going to do the stove. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and add in this TV here. And I'm just going to go ahead and place that right here. And then what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and add a little table under our TV so it's actually sitting on something. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some bookshelves. And we'll go ahead and add in the top of our bookshelves. And let's go ahead. We'll also throw in some windows into our scene. And I'll go ahead and throw in a clock as well. And so we'll have this clock on our wall. And for our windows, we have a few options. I'm going to choose this one here. I'm going to place it here. And we'll place one over here. All right, just to spruce up our room a little bit more, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a rug, and then we'll go ahead and add our table. And so we want our table to be on top of our rug, but we want our rug to be completely visible. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come to our background layer, and that's where I'm going to add in our rug. And so for our rug, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to go ahead and add our corners in real quick, where we want our rug to actually be at. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and connect our sides. And we'll go ahead and add in the center of our rug. All right, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock our background layer, come back to decorations, and then we go ahead and add in our table. Then so for our table, we're just going to go ahead and grab all these sprites, and I'm going to go ahead and position our table right here. And then let's go ahead and add in our chairs, and we'll just put one on each side of the table here. All right. So what we need to do then is let's go ahead and we need to update our collision layer. So we don't want our player to actually be able to walk up here. Instead, they would actually get to the wall and they wouldn't be able to move. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to come back down to our collision layer. And just so it's a little bit easier to see, I'm going to move this above our main scene, not into our main scene. And I'm going to do that with the foreground as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump over to our collision layer. I'm going to go ahead and grab that tile and make sure collision layer is selected. And let's go ahead and add that in. We want to make sure so our player can't collide with our table as well. So we'll go ahead and add that here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lower the opacity on the collision just so we can see through it. All right, so we'll go ahead and lock that layer. All right, so one more thing we want to do for our level is in our foreground. This is where we want to add in our objects where our player appears behind them. That's going to be our table. And so for our foreground layer, I'm just going to grab these and let me go ahead and lock the layer. We're just going to place that on top of our table. So then that way when we load in our level data in Phaser, we'll know that our player can move behind this object. All right, so now that we've built out our level, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and export our images, so then that will be ready for us to load inside Phaser. So to do that, let's go ahead and turn off our collision layer, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off our foreground layer, and we're just going to have our main scene here. So then what we'll do is first, let's go ahead and save our level. So I'm going to do save as, and I'm just going to call this building 1, and we'll save that as our TMX tiled map file name, and so we'll go ahead and save. Then I'm going to go ahead and do file, and I'm going to go ahead and do export as image. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to place this on my desktop so I can easily find it. All right, so for our file name, we're going to go ahead and call this building _1 _level background. All right, so for our file name here, we're going to need this to be in this convention because what we're going to do is in our code is when we load a particular level, we'll need to know which assets are actually tied to that level. And so what we're going to end up doing is originally in our custom town level, when we did our transition, we called it building 1. And so what we'll do in Phaser is we're going to go ahead and use that connects to property, and we're going to use that as the prefix for the assets that we need to load. And so we'll see here building 1 matches that. And then what we'll do is we'll do _level and we'll do _ background or foreground so we know which 2 assets to grab with it. And so we'll do the same thing with our JSON files. And so we'll do like building 1 JSON. And so we'll see that more once we get to the code. It's just important when you export these out, this is the file name that we're looking for. And we can always rename them later. So let's go ahead and save. I'm going to go ahead and place that on my desktop, and we'll go ahead and do export. And then let's go ahead and export out our foreground. So we'll go ahead and turn off our main scene and only turn on our foreground. And so I'm gonna go ahead and come up here. We'll do file, we'll do export as image, and we'll go ahead and do browse. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and do building 1 underscore level, and we're gonna do our foreground PNG. We'll go ahead and export that out. All right, so now that we have that set up, what we need to do now is we need to go ahead and define our scene transition so we know how our player can actually get into this particular level and how they can leave. And so what we'll do is at the top, let's go ahead and add a new object layer, and we're going to call this scene transitions. And so one thing to note is we're trying to match all of our layer names to align with what we did in our original town level. And so then that way our code in Phaser can stay the same because it's going to expect the same layer names for a lot of our logic we built out. As an example, for when we want to do our collisions, we're currently looking for a layer named collision. And so if we keep that the same, then our code's going to be reusable across the various levels we build. All right, so then all we need to do is let's go ahead and grab our encounter tile here, and we need to go ahead and position that right here on our entrance. So then what we'll do is let's choose our class. We'll go ahead and do our entrance. And for connects to, what we're going to do is we're going to call this main 1. And the reason for that is currently we're just calling our main level just level JSON, but we'll want to support multiple different main areas in our game. So as an example, we can picture this as like our starter town. This is where the player starts out, but maybe later on we want to transition to another area. And so like maybe it's the first town that the player comes across. And so in order to differentiate between those, we're going to go ahead and change our main level here from being level JSON to be main underscore 1. And that just helps us later, so that way we can easily expand out our game. And so what that will mean is for our level JSON, we're going to want to export that out and call it main underscore 1 JSON. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. We'll come back to our level. I'm going to do export as. And on my desktop, I'm just going to do main underscore 1 and I'm going to do JSON. So then back in our building, what we'll do is for our entrance ID, this will be entrance ID 1. And so we want to make sure this just matches whatever entrance ID we defined here. And so as an example, we have entrance ID 1. And so for our entrance ID, we just want to make sure this matches whatever we put in to our entrance ID here, because in our code, we're going to map those together. And then finally, we'll leave is building unchecked because we'll be going out to our outside area. It's not actually our building. So then what we should be able to do is let's go ahead and save all of our changes. And now we need to go export this out as a JSON file. And so we'll do export as. And so we're going to do building underscore 1. And that's going to be JSON. All right, and so real quick, what we're going to do is we're going to make one more building for our building 2. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do file, and I'm just going to do save as. I'm going to make a copy of our existing building. I'm just going to call this building 2. And then just so we can easily differentiate between the two, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to add in a plant. And so I'm going to come down to our decorations layer. I'm going to unlock it. I'm going to place this plant over in the corner just so it's very noticeable that, hey, this level is different. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is we'll need to update our collision layer since we have a new spot the player can't walk. We'll go ahead and do that here. All right, so what we should be able to do is let's go ahead and export this out so we have our second level. And so we'll just go ahead and do our foreground. So first I'll save our level. We'll do file, we're going to do export as image, and we'll do browse. And so we're going to do building underscore 2 underscore level, and we'll do our foreground PNG. Let's export that out. Let's turn on our main scene, and then we can view our data. And then we can view our image, and then we'll do file. Let's do export as image. We'll do browse, and I'm just going to do building underscore 2 level, and this will be our background. And let's go ahead and export that out. And then finally, the last thing we need to do is let's go ahead and export this out as our JSON. So we'll do file, we're going to do export as, and we're going to do our building 2, we'll do building underscore 2 dot JSON. All right, so now we've finished building out our 2 buildings. We're going to do a quick recap of what we did. And so the first thing we did is in our main level, we exported this out as main underscore 1 JSON. And then that way we can start building support for multiple areas in our game. And the other thing we did is we added in this new object layer called scene transitions. And scene transitions here just allows us to specify a tile that's going to have some metadata. So we know when our player wants to interact with that tile, we can go ahead and load a different level data in Phaser and then go ahead and display that to our player. And so what we did is we added this connects to property, and that's going to be associated with another JSON file that we need to go ahead and load. And we also add in this entrance ID. And so with that entrance ID, we went ahead and map that to an entrance that we added inside of one of our buildings. And so as an example here in our building 2, we can see on our entrance, we see it connects to our entrance ID 1, and then goes back to our main_1 JSON file. And so when we build our buildings, another thing we wanted to do is when we add in our layers, we want to reuse the same naming conventions that we did in our original level. And the reason for that is that way our code won't actually have to change. It's going to look for a collision layer, and if it finds it, it's going to go ahead and add that to our game. Same thing with like our foreground. And what's really cool about this is we can extend it, and if we want to add an NPC inside our building, we can do that as well. And so we can add in our NPC, and we'll be able to add those to our level when we load it. And so for the rest of the series, we'll be using the building 1 and building 2 that we built here in this video. They're also included in that original tiled assets folder that you downloaded from GitHub previously. And you are welcome to use those. But if you'd like to build your own, you're also welcome to do that as well. Just one thing to note is if you do build your own level, you want to make sure that you go ahead and follow the same process that we did for naming our various things and adding the various properties. And then that way everything should hook up in your code. Otherwise, you might have to modify a few things. All right, with that brings this video to an end. In our next video, we'll switch back to our code and we'll start loading in our new files, and we'll start adding in support for actually allowing our players to go into our buildings, and we'll add in that support for our multiple areas. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to the clean source code for this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please follow the links on your screen now.